of all arts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Amen. Easy, simple. I feel like every time I preach, I make at least a small confession. I don't know if confessional preaching is a thing, but today is no different. And I will confess that when I was in the late single digits, throughout most of my teens, I wanted to have grown up in the 1960s. I had tie-dye t-shirts. College, I had long hair. My favorite dares were Peter, Paul, and Mary. Ian and Silver, which might be slightly less smooth. I wanted to march across the bridge in Selma, protesting against the Vietnam War. And in a way, I suppose it was harmless, just as it is harmless that my children loved the 80s, apart from the fact that there was no good music in the 80s. Okay, I'll give you Prince and U2, but that's it. But of course, there's another side to the 60s. I was reading an essay by Timothy Denevy about Joan Didion, and her collection, her essays called The White Album, which is one of her best books. And in the essays, she briefly mentions watching Robert Kennedy's funeral in 1968, and a period of time immediately following where she had a prolonged attack of vertigo and nausea, and a feeling that she was going to pass out. It required significant treatment and medication. And from an archived interview, which was unavailable to the general public, Professor Denevy was able to make a connection between the funeral and the extended nausea. See, it appears that Joan Didion and her husband, neither one of whom were fans of Bobby Kennedy, were about to leave for Waikiki from San Francisco when they learned that Senator Kennedy had been shot, was in the hospital. Being in the days before the internet, upon landing, they searched for news and found nothing. The daily newspapers did not arrive at Hawaii until the day after. That evening, they attended a Don Ho concert. You remember him from Tiny Bullets? Yeah. Attended a Don Ho concert. And at the end of the concert, Don Ho, who had been looking somewhat down all evening, related to the crowd that Senator Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, had adopted, and asked one of his band members to sing the Lord's Prayer. Most of the crowd that had been attending were attending also a packet air convention. Most of them had been drinking. And when the musicians started singing, there was no reverence or appreciation for the moment, nor for the music. Instead, there was a hostile audience, angry that they weren't being entertained. The next day, the hotel in which they were staying set up a television by the pool. Now, at the time, I don't know how many even under the 60s, but at the time, the Lawrence Welk show was a big deal. And all the guests scattered to watch. When the programming was interrupted, to you. Joan was left alone with her husband to watch, but not before a few disgruntled words were shared. Now, keep this story in mind as we go back to today's gospel. Jesus has just finished the Sermon on the Mount in chapter 7. In chapter 8, Jesus comes down from the mountain. He heals a leper. He heals the centurion's servant. He heals Peter's mother. He goes across Galilee to meet two men living in the tombs with demons. Casting the demons into a herd of swine, he returns to inside of Galilee, perhaps in part because the folks in Gadarenes have none to see on having the pig population decimated. Arriving back in the area of his hometown, we begin today's gospel. The gospel, as you read it today, consists of 4 stories. Jesus calls Matthew the tax collector to be his disciple. Jesus eats with tax collectors and sinners. Jesus is called by the synagogue leader and heals his daughter, and the healing of the daughter is interrupted by the healing of a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. In all 4 stories, Jesus is being intimate with outcasts and undesirables. It might be hard to convey the antipathy the general population had towards tax collectors, but start by the feelings you might have had a couple of years ago when it was the foes that we increased funding to the IRS. And now take that same feeling and apply it to a single person you saw walking around marked as clearly as Hester Prynne in Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. And add onto this that there was a disparity of wealth between large landowners who were selling their patch crops to neighboring nations and small farmers barely able to feed their families. A flat tax across the board would hurt the small farmer far more than would hurt the large landowner, and would contribute to the small farmer's loss of their farm and perhaps becoming indentured or slaves to the large laborer. When you add all these things up, you can understand why tax collectors were hated. Here he is recruiting them to be among the closest and most intimate with it. Here he is, a holy man, eating with them and other saints. Through the ages, we've lost a sense of what tax collector meant to those at the time of Jesus, but truly, they were among the worst of the worst. And it's not like the hemorrhaging woman or the daughter who had died were considered better company. Being impure or unclean was a really big deal at this time. Remember that it wasn't until 1847 that Ignaz Semmelweis was able to convince the medical establishment in Vienna that it was important to wash your hands before surgery. And it was only in 1928 that Alexander Fleming discovered healing powers and penicillin. Having physical contact, laying a hand upon a diseased person, as Jesus is asked and then does, was a huge breach of custom and practice. Likewise, for the woman who interrupts Jesus' journey to the dead daughter. As David Tabb Stewart explains, in the ancient world, chronic menstrual condition would have disabled a woman not only ritually but socially. Pliny, remember Pliny the Younger was one of the historians of the kind, Pliny writes, crops touched by it, as in menstrual fluid, become barren. Grass dies, seeds in the garden dry up, fruits of trees fall off. Actual death and symbols of death, Jesus was not just hanging out with the ne'er-do-wells, Jesus was interacting with and was affectionate with those who, at least metaphorically and often quite literally, were dead to the larger community. Stop for a little and imagine what it must have been for one who had been rejected for so many years, to be loved so unconditionally, her faith made her well. And notice he doesn't say cured, but well. Outsiders, outcasts, those rejected by the larger culture, those no longer alive in the common culture. These were the people with whom Jesus finds one to call daughter. Term of endearment he used 4 times, 3 times in the equivalent passage that we read today in Mark and Matthew and Luke, and one other time when he refers to the women of Jerusalem on his way to the crucifixion. I will make another teach. I was tempted to write this sermon about those who might be considered contemporary outcasts, people experiencing poverty, people whose skin color or religion or documentation might not be of the majority found in the United States. Something I've been doing for most of my profession. I might have spoken about laws being considered, which would make life exceptionally more difficult for teenagers who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. I could have spoken about that. To be honest, many ads will get so very well. For example, turn to Nadia Bowles-Weber and you'll get excellent thoughts on the subject. The thing is, But I believe the Gospels that Jesus calls us not to do the easy things. He calls us to step outside of our comfort zones. My daughter is bisexual. I had many close friends who identify as L or G or B or T or Q. My brothers and sisters all have Afro-American fathers on their birth certificate. I have spent most of my professional life working with people experiencing poverty, speaking to how they are systematically excluded in the United States, and why our society must continue the painful journey to bend towards justice may not be easy, but it's certainly within my comfort zone. What's not within my comfort zone, what is not easy for me, is reaching out to the people Joan Didion saw making fun of a man singing the Lord's Prayer in response to JFK's death. What is not within my comfort zone is finding compassion for those who left the broadcast at a funeral when they confronted not being entertained by Lord as well. I included the Joan Didion anecdote, both because I think it is worth remembering that at every age, including ours, every age has its moments where it feels like it's all falling apart. And because, at least for me, there is something in Jesus' all to those who will be part of this loop, for which we are required to stretch. Stretch as in the most difficult yoga class, and find the goodness in even those for whom you might find it most unlikely. Now, you might think, Michael, that's a tremendously wonderful thought, but isn't entirely practical. And I would have to answer, no. If practicality had anything to do with being a follower of Jesus, you might as well give up and go home. This is not a religion based on equations or formulas. This is not a religion based upon the faith that God resides within all of us, and that within all of us there is the capacity for love. Hosea 6:6, which was quoted in today's gospel. Hosea 6:6 writes, "For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." But the phrase steadfast love could just as easily have been translated as "I desire mercy, not setbacks." I desire mercy. Amanda Rickham, writing the Washington Post, talks about an intervention in gang warfare. She writes, quote, "If a gang member gets shot, they visit him in the hospital and issue a kidnapping, maybe for the 10th time. And the sales pitch is really asking the question, do you want to continue this cycle? As Curtis Toller from the Mighty's prevention outfit Chipotle Bread has explained, often when you ask, do you want this cycle to continue? They say, yes, they do, and very much. So what then? Toller is out. So the next question is, do you want the family members to have to go through what you're going through? It doesn't work to appeal to logic. It doesn't work to appeal to self-interest. It is exceptionally easy to toss logic and self-interest aside. It is so much harder to toss aside love. And that, my friends, that is how the centurion who came to Jesus in chapter 8, that is how the believer, synagogue, got his status and position in today's gospel. And that is how the television show Ted Lasso, Coach Beard is able to forgive Nate, who has done terrible things, and also can jump. Look it up. So, love. Reach out to those who are most difficult for you and speak with them about those whom they love and what kind of world they would like for it. And there, with mercy, you will find a connection. I'll leave you with a poem. I'll go to the limits in your longing by Rainier Maria Rilke, translated by Joanna Mason. Reads, God speaks to each of us as he raised us and walks with us silently out of it. These are the words we duly hear. You sent out beyond a recall. Go to the limits of your life and by flare up like a flame and make big shadows at the noon. Let everything happen. Beauty, terror, just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose. Nearby is country they call love. You will know it by experiences. Give me your hand.